My business partner tried to bankrupt me and start his own company. At the investor meeting, he said, "It's all over for you." In court, he presented fake financial records. I waited until the judge turned to me. I handed over the real records, and he realized his mistake too late. I made the worst mistake of my life 5 years ago when I trusted someone I thought was a friend. His name was Mike Reynolds, and together, we built a tech startup from the ground up. We started small, just 2 guys in a tiny office in San Diego, California, working late nights, pouring everything we had into making it work. The dream was simple: create innovative software solutions for businesses. For a while, it was exactly that, a dream. The first couple of years were tough, but we pushed through. Then, in 2018, everything changed. A major investor put $2 million into our company, and suddenly, we weren't just another struggling startup. We had funding, clients, and a real chance to take our business to the next level. And that's when Mike stabbed me in the back. The first sign something was wrong. It started with small things. I noticed discrepancies in our financial reports. Payments that should have been cleared were marked as pending. Vendor invoices I didn't recognize kept showing up. At first, I thought it was just bookkeeping errors. Then, one night, I stayed late to finish some system maintenance. I was going through our server logs when I saw something strange: files had been deleted and replaced with updated versions. That didn't make sense. I restored the deleted files and compared them to the new ones. The numbers didn't match. Someone had altered our financial records. I started digging deeper. Discovering the truth. The next day, I went through every single bank statement. And that's when I saw it. Money was missing. At first, it was small amounts, $5,000 here, $8,000 there. But over time, it had added up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. There was only one person who had access to the company accounts besides me. Mike. I wasn't ready to believe it. We had built this company together. Why would he steal from it? I needed proof. The confrontation. The following night, I stayed late again and accessed the company email archives. I found emails between Mike and potential investors, ones I had never even heard of. He was making promises. Telling them our company was struggling. That he was planning to take things in a new direction. That's when it clicked. Mike was planning to bankrupt our company and start a new one, without me. I confronted him the next morning. I didn't bother with small talk. I just asked him, straight up, "Where's the money, Mike?" His reaction? He laughed. I will never forget that moment. He leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said, "Oh man, you weren't supposed to see that." He wasn't even trying to deny it. I was so angry I could barely speak. "You're stealing from the company." He shrugged. "Nothing personal. Just business." Then he laid it all out. He had been slowly moving money out of the company for over a year. Setting up a new business behind my back, one that would take all our investors and clients the moment Bright Future Solutions collapsed. And the best part? He made it look like I was the problem. He altered financial records to make it seem like I was the one mismanaging funds. He set up meetings with investors where he painted me as incompetent. At the end of it, he looked me in the eye and said, "This company is done for. Investors are pulling out. You're gonna be drowning in debt. And you won't be able to prove a thing." That's when I knew. I had no choice but to destroy him. The setup. Mike thought he had covered his tracks. But he forgot one thing. I was the one who built our entire system. The files he deleted. I restored them. The money he moved. I traced every transaction. The emails he sent. I backed them up. I worked for 3 days straight. I pulled every bank statement, invoice, email, and transaction log. I put together a detailed timeline of every shady thing he had done. And then I waited. The investor meeting. Mike had arranged a meeting with our investors. He was going to announce that Bright Future Solutions was failing and that he was starting a new company. I walked into that meeting calm. Mike stood at the front of the room, talking about how unfortunate it was that Bright Future Solutions was no longer sustainable. He blamed me. Said I had made bad financial decisions. Said he was trying to save the company, but it was too late. Then he looked at me. Smirked. "It's all over for you," he said. I smiled. "Yeah, Mike. You're right. It is over." Then I pulled out my laptop and connected it to the projector. The first slide. Our real financial records. The room went dead silent. I walked them through every single fraudulent transaction. Every fake invoice Mike had created. Every wire transfer to his secret account. Every altered financial record. Every email where he schemed to steal investors and clients. I ended the presentation with a screenshot of his new company's website. The one he had secretly registered. Then I turned to the investors. And I said, "This is the man you were about to trust with your money." Mike's face went pale. One investor, Richard Langford, turned to him. "Mike, do you have anything to say?" Mike tried to laugh it off. "This is a misunderstanding," I cut him off. "No, Mike. The misunderstanding was me thinking you were my friend." Nobody said a word. Then Richard spoke. "You just made the worst mistake of your life." Mike knew. He was done. But it wasn't over yet. I wasn't going to let him walk away that easily. Taking it to court. The investors pulled out of Mike's fake company. They cut ties with him immediately. But I wasn't done. I sued him for fraud, embezzlement, and breach of contract. Mike, in a desperate attempt to save himself, submitted fake financial documents in court. When the judge turned to me, I smiled. I handed over the real records. The moment Mike saw what I had given the judge, his face turned white. He realized his mistake too late. The courtroom battle begins. Mike sat across from me in the courtroom, trying to look calm, but I could see the way his hands clenched under the table. The judge flipped through the real financial records I had just handed over. His expression went from neutral to deeply unimpressed. "Mr. Reynolds," the judge said, adjusting his glasses. "Are you aware that submitting falsified financial documents in a court of law is a criminal offense?" Mike shifted in his chair. His lawyer, a guy who looked like he had been promised an easy win, leaned over and whispered furiously in his ear. Mike swallowed, nodded, and forced a smile. "There must be a misunderstanding," he said, his voice a little shaky. I was given incorrect numbers by my accountant." I almost laughed out loud. His accountant? Mike didn't have an accountant. He handled all the finances himself. That was the whole point. The judge didn't even dignify his excuse with a response. He just looked at me. "Do you have evidence that these records were altered by the defendant?" I had been waiting for this moment. "Yes, Your Honor." I reached into my bag and pulled out a USB drive. This contains a backup of our financial records from the company server, including timestamps showing when the fraudulent files were created and who edited them. Mike froze. I knew what he was thinking. He had deleted those files. He thought they were gone forever. But I had restored everything. Every last transaction. I handed the USB to the court clerk. The judge nodded for the IT specialist to check it. Mike's lawyer tried to intervene. "Your Honor, this evidence is being introduced without prior notice," the judge held up a hand. "Mr. Reynolds submitted financial records. If these are the real versions, then I think we all want to see them." Mike was sweating now. The IT specialist plugged in the USB and started scrolling. A few minutes later, he looked up and nodded at the judge. "These files show clear alterations," he confirmed. "The original records match the plaintiff's claims." Mike stiffened. His lawyer muttered something to him under his breath, and I saw the first crack in his carefully constructed confidence. He was screwed. Mike's desperate move. The next time we were in court, Mike switched strategies. Instead of trying to deny the fraud, he tried to make it look like I was involved. My client was not acting alone, his lawyer argued. "Mr. Carter, that's me, was the co-founder. He had access to the accounts. If there was fraud, how do we know he wasn't part of it?" I almost lost it. But I kept my face neutral. I was ready for this. "Your Honor," I said, keeping my voice calm, "the defense is grasping at straws. If I had been involved, why would I bring all of this evidence to court? Why would I expose my own company?" The judge nodded, unimpressed with Mike's sudden shift in tactics. Then I pulled out my next move. "I also have an email from Mr. Reynolds to a third-party accountant, offering them money to alter financial statements." I handed printed copies to the court clerk. Mike's face turned gray. His lawyer sighed, looking like he wanted to crawl under the table. The judge read the email, then looked at Mike. "Mr. Reynolds, I strongly suggest you reconsider your approach here." Mike opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The betrayal he didn't see coming. After that, things moved quickly. The investors who had pulled out of his company. They weren't done with him yet. One of them, Richard Langford, filed a separate civil lawsuit against him for fraud. Mike now had 2 lawsuits to deal with. But the real kicker? His own lawyer quit. After the email evidence came out, Mike must have tried to lie to his lawyer too. Whatever happened behind closed doors, his attorney filed a motion to withdraw from the case. That meant Mike had to find a new lawyer mid-trial. Someone who didn't have time to prepare. By now, I could see the panic setting in. Mike had gone from cocky and smug to desperate. And then something unexpected happened. A twist I didn't see coming. One night, at 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it. But something told me to pick up. I answered. Hello. A woman's voice came through. Is this Alex Carter? Yes. She took a deep breath. My name is Rachel Reynolds. I'm Mike's wife. I sat up straight. Okay, I said cautiously. Why are you calling me? She hesitated. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. I think you should know. Mike's been hiding money overseas. I gripped the phone tighter. Come again. I found documents on his laptop, she said, her voice shaking. Bank accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. He's been funneling money there for months. I don't know what to do. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mike had been stealing even more than I thought. But his wife turning on him? That was something I hadn't expected. Rachel, I said slowly, would you be willing to give those documents to my lawyer? She hesitated. Then, quietly, she said, yes. The next day, I met with my lawyer. I handed over the new evidence. My lawyer just shook his head. This guy's an idiot. We immediately filed a motion to include the offshore accounts in the trial. Mike showed up to court that week looking worse than ever. Dark circles under his eyes. Jaw clenched. He knew. He knew it was over. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted to make sure he never recovered from this. By now, Mike was drowning. His lawyer had quit. He was facing 2 lawsuits, one from me, and one from Richard Langford, the investor he had tried to scam. His own wife had just handed over proof that he had been hiding money in offshore accounts. And worst of all, the judge was losing patience. Mike had spent weeks trying to stall, delay, and dodge accountability. But with every hearing, his situation got worse. I thought that would be enough to break him. I was wrong. Because Mike wasn't going to go down without taking me with him. The fake witness. A few days after Rachel handed over the offshore bank documents, my lawyer called me. You're not going to believe this, he said. Mike had somehow found a witness who was willing to testify that I had been involved in the financial fraud. A guy named Brian Lutz. I frowned. The name sounded vaguely familiar. Then it clicked. Brian was an ex-employee, one I had personally fired 2 years ago for slacking off and missing deadlines. I barely remembered the guy. But now, he was suddenly claiming that I had been cooking the books right alongside Mike. My stomach twisted. I knew the allegations were complete bullshit. But in a courtroom, all it takes is a little doubt to turn things against you. My lawyer wasn't panicking yet. This is a desperate move. But we need to shut it down fast. So I did the only thing I could. I started digging. Mike's witness falls apart. I spent the next 2 days gathering every bit of evidence I could on Brian Lutz. It didn't take long before I found something interesting. 3 weeks before his testimony, Brian had received a $50,000 wire transfer. From a bank account connected to Mike. When I showed my lawyer, he just shook his head. This is straight-up bribery. I didn't waste time. We filed a motion to investigate Brian's financial records. When the judge saw the evidence, he ordered Brian to hand over his bank statements. That's when Brian panicked. He refused. His lawyer tried to fight it, but the judge wasn't having it. If Mr. Lutz cannot provide a legitimate source for this $50,000 payment, then his testimony will not be considered credible. Brian cracked in under 24 hours. He withdrew from testifying. Mike's public humiliation. After that, things spiraled for Mike. The offshore accounts. The fake witness. The forged financial documents. It was all falling apart. But then, something happened that I didn't expect. One of the investors, a guy named Mark Ellison, leaked the details of the trial to the press. And the story blew up. San Diego tech CEO faces fraud allegations, offshore accounts discovered, business partner betrayal. Startup founder accused of embezzlement. Mike's name was everywhere. Reporters were calling his old clients. Journalists were digging into his past. And that's when the biggest twist of all dropped. Mike wasn't just stealing from our company. He had done this before. Mike's past catches up to him. One morning, my lawyer called me. "Alex," he said, "you're going to want to see this." He sent me a news article. It was from 2012. A small startup in Seattle had collapsed overnight because of financial irregularities. The CEO? A man named Michael Reynolds. My blood ran cold. Mike had pulled the same scam before. I kept reading. The article mentioned that the company had mysteriously lost funding, investors had been duped, and the co-founder had been forced into bankruptcy. It was the same playbook. I looked up the name of the co-founder from the article. James Holloway. And then I did something Mike never expected. I called him. The one person who knew everything. James Holloway picked up on the second ring. "This is James." I introduced myself and explained the situation. The moment I said Mike's name, James went quiet. Then he let out a bitter laugh. "Let me guess," he said. "He stole money from your company and tried to blame you for it." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Yeah," I said. "That's exactly what he did." James sighed. "Yeah. That's what he does." Then he told me everything. Mike had pulled the exact same con in Seattle. Set up a business, gained trust, stole money, then blamed his partner. James had tried to fight back, but at the time, he didn't have enough evidence. Mike had gotten away with it. But now, we had proof. The final piece of the puzzle. James was more than willing to testify. We filed a motion to include evidence of Mike's past fraudulent activities. Mike's new lawyer, who had barely had time to prepare, tried to fight it. But the judge? He granted it. For the first time in this entire mess, I saw real fear in Mike's eyes. And I wasn't done yet. Because I had one last move to make. The courtroom finale. The courtroom was packed. Reporters. Investors. Even some of our former employees. Everyone wanted to see the final downfall of Mike Reynolds. His first mistake was thinking he could walk away from this unscathed. His second mistake was underestimating how far I was willing to go to destroy him. And his final mistake, the one that sealed his fate, was assuming that his past wouldn't catch up with him. Because today, it was all coming out. The final witness. James Holloway sat in the witness chair, looking straight at Mike. "I know exactly what kind of man he is," James said, his voice steady. "He did this to me 10 years ago. He stole from our company, blamed me, and walked away free. I lost everything. My job. My house. My reputation. I spent years trying to rebuild my life. And now he's done the same thing again." I glanced at Mike. His hands were white-knuckled fists. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. The judge turned to Mike's lawyer. "Do you have any questions for the witness?" Mike's lawyer, his third one, at this point, stood up. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and said, "No, Your Honor." Because what could he possibly say? The evidence was undeniable. The pattern was obvious. Mike had done this before. And now? It was over. Mike's breakdown. When the judge asked Mike if he had anything to say in his defense, he just snapped. He shot up from his chair. "This is all bullshit," he shouted, his face red. "I built that company. I made it successful. And you," he pointed a shaking finger at me. "You were just riding my coattails. You should be thanking me." I sat back, arms crossed. The courtroom was silent. The judge sighed and rubbed his temples. "Mr. Reynolds, sit down." But Mike wasn't finished. He turned to the investors. "You all would be nothing without me," he yelled. "I'm the reason you made money. I'm the reason this company even exists." And then, the final nail in his coffin. He turned to Rachel, his wife, who was sitting near the back. You betrayed me." Rachel didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She just stared at him with cold, dead eyes. And then she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You did this to yourself." Mike froze. The rage drained from his face. For the first time, I saw actual fear in his eyes. Because he finally understood. There was no way out. The judge didn't waste time. Mike was found guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and falsifying financial documents. He was ordered to pay back every stolen dollar, plus damages. Millions. And because of his fake witness scheme, the judge referred him for criminal charges. Mike didn't even bother looking at me as the bailiff escorted him out. He just kept his head down. Because for the first time in his life, Mike Reynolds had lost. Bright Future Solutions survived. After the trial, I had to do damage control. Some investors were still hesitant, but with Mike gone, and proof that I had nothing to do with the fraud, we managed to stabilize. I brought in a new CFO. Someone I could actually trust. And 2 years later, we landed a $10 million deal with a major client. The company thrived. As for Mike, he lost everything. The lawsuits bankrupted him. The criminal charges meant he was looking at prison time. His wife divorced him and took what little assets he had left. The last I heard, he was working a minimum wage job in a call center. And honestly, he got off easy. Looking back, I don't feel sorry for him. I don't feel guilty. Because I gave him every chance to do the right thing. And he chose greed. If there's one thing I learned from this, it's that trust is everything. And Mike? He was never worth it.